to now, you remember that we have dealt with the importance of culture in language teaching courses, okay? And we said that how should we, or what should we do in order to integrate the culture into the language curriculum? And if you remember, we defined some cultural topics that should be included in the cultural syllabus. Then we dealt with the ways of assessing. Do you remember assessing and evaluating? And we mentioned projects and portfolios, and we mentioned types of tests that we should evaluate, and we discussed whether we should evaluate or assess culture separately or integrated or mixed with the assessment made for the language skills or abilities of the students, okay? Now, like last time we dealt with the approaches of teaching culture. Do you remember the monocultural approach, the intercultural approach? Anyway, we'll deal later on because I want to make a review, because we will work on some textbooks and make an analysis regarding to the checklists that we dealt last time. Now, what we should focus today, is on the techniques and activities we should use when teaching culture. And as I said before, there is no, let's say, golden rule which suggests which technique must be used and which not, okay? So we are just introduced to this technique, so it's up to you, up to us as teachers, what kind of elements should we pick from one technique and what other elements from another technique. So we can make even a mixture of techniques, because it depends on the classroom, it depends on the setting we are teaching. Do you remember the 3 factors that affect the language and culture teaching process? One of them was the setting where culture and language was taught, okay? So it affects the techniques and approaches that we choose to teach culture. What is important is that we should try to establish a warm and tolerant atmosphere and climate with the students. What we said before, we should not focus or we should not impose the target culture to the students, especially to the unwilling students, because we might have students which are not enough aware of their own culture, okay? So what we should do, as Clark suggests, is that we should have the necessary skills to, first of all, make students develop a positive sense of themselves, of their own culture, and then help them discover elements or aspects of the target culture, okay? So we should not impose. Now let's go on with Stern's technique. Stern is a scholar, one of the many scholars we have mentioned when dealing with culture and culture teaching, has presented some techniques, okay? And one of them was creating an authentic environment. Authentic meaning is that, okay, we are in a classroom setting, we are teaching culture, but it would be best if, for example, walls were filled with posters or maps of the target culture. For example, if we are teaching, let's say, American culture or British culture, it would be good if we had some flags or some elements which depict some aspects of the target culture, of the American culture or of the British culture, okay? And for example, we can, according to Stern, we can give students, or we can present or provide some culture wall charts. Wall charts meaning that within the walls we put posters with charts and illustration, pictures, whatever, okay? We discussed last time something about the project. Do you remember that we said we can take some flags, for example, or some pictures which depict, let's say, the Thanksgiving Day or whatever, okay? Or Hugs considers this wall, let's say, these wall charts or these classroom settings in which we fill them with cultural elements as cultural islands, okay? So we can consider, or we can transform the class into a cultural island. Let it be American island or British island, whatever. The second technique, or another technique, not the second by the order, is the technique in which we provide some cultural information. That is, we, for example, students encounter a certain or given text in the language, in the textbooks, in the language course books, okay? And they find difficulties in explaining or in understanding such text, okay? So the teacher, the duty of the teacher is to explain and to teach such text or the circumstances presented in the text. That is why we say that these kind of, let's say, techniques are unplanned because they come up at the spot, okay? So they come up basing on the circumstances, on the textbooks that are presented in the language course curriculum. The next technique is the slice of life technique. You know, what, like the name suggests, slice of technique, slice of life, means that the teacher or the book, but the duty of teacher is to explain, to teach. The teacher explains or teaches a segment of life, okay? For example, let's say the teacher explains or teaches, let's say the characteristics or details of a Thanksgiving Day in America, okay? So this is like she is or he is presenting a slice, a piece of the life in the target culture, okay? The next is the culture assimilator, okay? This is, I wouldn't consider like a must-do technique, but this is a technique which mostly occurs naturally to the teachers. Why? Because there are many cases in which there are misunderstandings as a result of having multicultural classrooms, especially nowadays. Now remember, we are not speaking only of, let's say, different cultures or cultures of different countries. We might also speak of differences between cultures within one country, okay? So, having such students which belong to different cultural backgrounds, there might have cases in which we have misunderstandings, okay, as a result of crossing of cultures between them, okay? For example, let me give you an illustration. Now, actually, this example can also be considered as a pun of words, but anyway. The teacher comes to the class and says to the students, "Did you miss my lecture?" And the students say, "Not at all." What is wrong here? The students think that the teacher is asking whether they felt like sorry for not having lectures, okay? But the teacher actually is asking whether they were present or not in the lecture, okay? So that is some misunderstandings where the teacher, the role of the teacher might be very important in making clear the situation, okay? Now, this kind of misunderstanding can also happen within one culture, okay? So there might be misunderstanding and misinterpretations by the students, even the students which belong to the same culture. The duty and the task of the teacher is to make clear, to assimilate these, let's say, misunderstandings. Next is the cultural capsule. Capsule is, that is, a small piece and one aspect of the cultural background or the target culture. So the teacher gives a description of a certain aspect of the culture, target culture, and this process is followed by a discussion. For example, students might, let's say, read a text about a wedding, okay? So they read the text, they might sometimes, depending, they might translate the text, okay? And then the teacher might ask to the students to discuss or to make a summary of the text, so to understand or to make clear whether the students have understood the text or not. Now, when we say the text, we mean the cultural elements in the text, okay? Now, let's go on with the other techniques. Next is culture cluster. Cluster, it is made of 2 or more capsules which are, let's say, related to each other, okay? Capsules which belong together. For example, we can have a cultural cluster regarding to the French wedding ceremony, okay? And which is made of 4 capsules. The first one is the civil ceremony. This is one capsule. So in this capsule, it is explained how is the civil ceremony made and what are, let's say, some characteristics or main aspects or main elements, or what do the bride or the groom do in this civil ceremony, who is present in the civil ceremony, and so on. Then the second capsule might consist of the religious ceremony. So here in the second capsule, it is depicted this ceremony. In the third, the wedding banquet, and in the fourth, the capsule can consist of acting out a country wedding. Okay, so the capsule is not, when we say capsule, we should not only imagine, let's say, posters or clusters. Okay, we can also make it, present it as a video show or documentary or even a drama. Okay, so we can have some students act like they were the groom or the bride, or depending on the students you have and the classroom setting as well. Then we have the audio motor unit. which means that the teachers give some comments to the students, and the students need to act them out, okay? For example, you know that a very important element of the Japanese culture is, especially in education, is that people bow all the time, okay? So if I say bow, you need to act, okay? So this is part of the cultural element. So I make some cultural comments, okay? I should not say, for example, it's not that I say stand up and you stand up, okay? So I make comments which are related to culture teaching, of course. So in this way, they learn new elements of the target culture. So they somehow learn by doing. And this is a very good way of fixing and of memorizing better the cultural elements of the target culture. The last two ones are the micrologue, which consists of the teacher gives a cultural passage, asks students questions, students give the answers, then they make role plays, and then they make a summary. And at the end, the teacher might choose some students to make or to highlight the main units or the main elements of this unit, okay? We are speaking of cultural elements, okay? So it's not necessary to really repeat again. The last one is the Kulton, okay? The Kulton. The Kulton is a cartoon strip which depicts some main misunderstandings, okay? So this is like, it can consist of a poster on the wall or a video of certain situations or circumstances which explain or depict some misunderstandings between different cultures, okay? So these are some of the main techniques. Now I want to go back to the three checklists presented by different scholars, because later on we will work on some books and we will, let's say, analyze the cultural element or